Welcome to the Soulful CXO, where we discuss leadership principles, core values, health, wellness, and resiliency. I'm Dr. Rebecca Wynn, the founder and the host of the show. Do you have a topic or guest you would like to be featured on the show? Would you like to be a sponsor? Please reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at rebecca@soulfulcxo.com. Please go to our partner, Cybersecurity Tribe, for weekly show recaps and other resources. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Now sit back and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Soulful CXO. I'm your host, Dr. Rebecca Wynn. We are pleased to have with us today Kate Fazzini, who is CEO and partner for Blueline Recoveries, a company devoted to clawing back funds lost to wire fraud. She is well known for being a highly devoted, intuitive, goal-driven, leading cybersecurity, risk, and privacy expert who takes pride in being able to share her knowledge of the field. She serves as a professor of cybersecurity at Georgetown University and a keynote speaker, having formerly reported extensively on cybersecurity as a staff member of the Wall Street Journal, where she and I first met, and CNBC. She is the author of the 2019 book, Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime. I really enjoyed that book. Highly recommend you read it. Prior to her role in academics and media, Kate helped develop effective security processes, create disaster communication plans, and educate experts as a cybersecurity executive at JP Morgan Chase & Company and Promontory Financial Group and IBM Company. Kate, great to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, Rebecca, and I'm a huge fan. So thank you so much for having me on. We've switched tables this time, I think. So now you'll be asking the questions. I like that.
Yeah, I do need to tell the audience too that when I first got that call, our administrative assistant came in and says, "Hey, Rebecca, Wall Street Journal is on the phone for you. Kate saw an article you just posted about PGP encryption." I thought I was being fished, and I was like, "Okay, put the call through." And ended up being that we've had a great relationship since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I terrified you. That happens to a lot of executives. At least it did. It's totally opposite now that I'm on the vendor side of things. So they're just annoyed by me. But in any event, yeah, that's a great story. Thank you, Rebecca.
Your background is always really fascinating because I believe your first degree started in literature, and then you went on to cybersecurity and you went into reporting. Can you go ahead and explain a little bit that journey? Because I do think it's wonderful for our audience to know about that.
I think I have always been a little bit unfocused, I guess is the right word. And so when I was in college in undergrad, I went to the Ohio State University, and that is where I'm from. I'm from Ohio. And I majored in English because I kind of couldn't figure out what else to pick. And I really liked Shakespeare, and I went, and studied abroad and did all this stuff. But at the same time, I worked for this company called Unicom that was our campus computer store, and was responsible at that time at Ohio State for helping build out the Ohio Supercomputer Center. And we had, at that time, we had one of the first kind of in-house Apple stores. This was during the era of the Apple Cube, which I think is like a relic at this point. But I had always been, I liked computers. I had always done a lot of work just kind of on my own, doing some programming when I was very young. And I'm sorry, like I said, I'm a little unfocused. But when I was very young, this was back when we had telecom, where if you called somebody who was like in the town over from you, it would be a long distance charge, and sometimes a very high long distance charge. It was the era before cell phones. And I helped some of my friends make these black boxes, which way back in the 80s were ways that you could bypass that. And we could call like us little girlfriends, wanting to avoid $1,000 phone bill at the end of the month. So, necessity is the mother of invention. But, fast forward to college, I still loved getting into the computers. We ended up doing all kinds of events. We would have like video game tournaments and things. And I found this real passion for it. I love the technology and I love the people. And I found that I love helping them translate their expertise in technology to the real world. And that's where, we were able to develop a number of things that were very successful. We had a Palm Pilot program back again when these were big, that we helped roll out to many of the doctors at the university hospital. So early on, before now everybody has iPads, but it was just those being able, even as a college student, to just talk to doctors about technology in a way that they would understand without, having to get into some really deep technical details. So it was just something that I loved and really followed me throughout my career. Absolutely.
That's always really fascinating. And I know I've always been a really big fan of your career since we met. And then, I did cyberstalk you and read everything that you wrote. You and I talked offline that it was okay to bring this up. So I want to let my audience know that I'm not being insensitive. But you pseudo disappeared about the time when your book came out, and you worried people like myself. And part of the thing that we talk about on the show is health, wellness, and resiliency, and getting back to who you are as an individual and taking care of yourself. Could you walk us through a little bit of that and how important that is and what you learned about yourself during those years?
Yeah, of course. And that was, I had taken a break from CNBC. I think it was August of, was it 2019 or 2020? I'm sort of mixing up the years because COVID consolidated a lot of things. But I was actually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And I found out that I had multiple sclerosis after I had actually gone to Black Hat. And I was, very gung-ho. And I believe that I walked in the summer heat, the desert heat, down from the hotel where Black Hat was going on to where DEF CON was going on and back. And it was, I learned later that heat can be a huge trigger for multiple sclerosis. And I ended up having some very significant problems with my eye. And, it took a couple of weeks, but after I got back to New York, and I went to New York Presbyterian and had some wonderful doctors there, and met some wonderful doctors at the NYU Langone IMSMP, the International Multiple Sclerosis Practice, and the Tisch Research Center. Sorry, I feel like I have to mention them, but they have such long names. So it was a very devastating diagnosis at the time. And it took me some time to get used to the idea that, the fact that I get exhausted commuting or doing some of these really heavy lifting, staying up late, pulling all-nighters, was something that I had to get used to. I had to learn how to find something that I was passionate enough about to make it worthwhile. I have 2 kids. I have a lot invested in their success and raising them and being there for them. But I also have a passion for helping people. And so I feel like it took a little time, but I think all of those things came together. And I needed, I don't think of it as, I'm sorry that you were worried, but it was actually wonderfully healing to sometimes get away from social media, I think. Especially at CNBC, because I had been where I was, it was just constantly inundated. I don't know if you watch Succession, they've actually filmed all the scenes in the CNBC studio where I used to work, where he comes in and he's like looking at, so you can see there's TVs everywhere. There's no windows, it's just constant information and on my phone. And it was very nice to take a break and really kind of get back to what I wanted to do. And certainly now with what I'm doing now, that's the case.
As you did this self-reflection, not only about what it was going to be holistically for family, what it was going to be, I'm sure you've had to make some health changes along those lines. Mm-hmm. How did you deal with, I know one of the things that we get going so much in all the media, and I know one of the things when I had Teresa Payton, and we talked about sometimes taking that 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or 5 minutes to 10 minutes, is really fully deplugging yourself from all media, really, to get those breaks. But you were so in it from being on the air so much and all that kind of stuff. Did you find yourself kind of like going through withdrawal syndromes or something like that? Because like you said, you had TV cameras around there, you were constantly on the air, you were constantly writing, things along those lines. And then, I know it didn't fully, but it kind of went pseudo cold turkey. Did you find yourself kind of having withdrawals? And if you did, how did you deal with handling that?
I think the only thing I miss now, I don't really enjoy being a public person very much, and especially at like a mainstream consumer news organization, you get hit with a lot of craziness, and that was sort of uncomfortable. So I was actually quite comfortable with it. The one thing that I was upset about was that I didn't have somebody doing my hair and makeup anymore, and I would have to like do it myself. And, there's like eyeliner on the side of my face and I'm wearing sweatpants and just like, I could not keep it together without the wonderful team of professionals at CNBC. But really, that was the only thing. I felt very comfortable. I also went back to doing some freelance work and some consulting work and really felt much more comfortable in that role. It's actually taken me some time to get back to just having a social media presence and being out there. I like the way that it is now. It's a much better balance. It's not a constant blast, I guess you could say.
Did you do I know one of the things I've done quite a few times is like a Venn diagram on what's important to me physically, emotionally, spiritually, leadership, kind of business I want to work with, what I don't want to work with. And you're to a point where your career, and obviously you started your brand new company out, where you need to figure out where was Kate want to be today and going into the future. Did you have some tools you used, or is it just through all your years of experience? How did you figure all that out?
I think every year I take the time to I have these like 5 vectors of my life that I like to break things down into. And it's, family, financial, and spirituality, health, and what's the other one? I guess it's home life, because I like to do a lot of DIY. So that's usually more of a practical thing. Like, do I need to repair the roof this year? And every year I go through that, and it's always a little bit different, but there's always, these overarching goals of just wanting to be around some very interesting people. So, one of the things that has carried me through my entire career and why all of these pieces fit together is because everywhere I've gone, I've had the chance to meet incredible, well-educated, really, really bright, interesting people. The Wall Street Journal and CNBC were just filled to the brim with that stuff. And it was amazing. Now I get to work with my business partners now are John Galasso and Rob Gianetta. They're former NYPD. They were there for 25 years each. John was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Rob does an enormous amount of security work for churches and synagogues in New York City. Really great fraud investigators and just incredibly well-connected people. And we have so much fun. And it's just, that's the main difference, I think, that, interesting people along the way, and then finding that group where you're always engaged and always doing your best work. That's kind of where I am now. I'm sorry, that was like a meandering answer.
No, it is a very thorough answer. One of the things that's always interested me on anybody who does cybersecurity and tech and having to be on the air and doing all this research and doing all these publications, how in the world do you synthesize so much information quickly to go ahead and to get it out in a thoughtful manner? Because I know that's a big challenge, because we get hit with stuff and then we're asked, even from executives, we're asked to paraphrase it very, very quickly. What have you learned over the years that our audience could maybe gravitate towards that can help us?
Well, there's definitely a very unfortunate lack of rest time for most people. And I mean, having been on the journalism side and seeing how really, really good journalists work and how they are able to put together the pieces of the puzzle in a really strong argument, there's a lot of time that you have to spend just thinking. And I have to carve out that kind of time for myself now, because when I work on fraud cases, a lot of times it's difficult to see all of the angles that could possibly lead to a positive resolution. And in many of them, it's something novel. It's somebody that I haven't thought of who I could call who has the answer. But that is locked up somewhere in my head, and it's really not something that you can find on a computer, because there's different steps that are going to have to take place, and you have to sit down and think about those things. I'm a huge opponent of hustle culture, which is tough when you're doing a startup. So everybody, actually, I have my combos and big gulp right now, so I probably shouldn't talk because I'm that's my lunch today. I've fallen into some of those traps, but I hate hustle culture. I hate constant working. you can't actually get anything done. And in fact, now people can understand that more that ChatGPT is here, where I would have spent probably like 2 hours coming up with a contract, for some kind of unusual engagement that I was with. I could just put in some parameters and here's the legal contract. And now I don't have to, worry so much about those things. The value of your sitting at a computer and typing away for hours and hours is going to go down substantially in the next couple of years. And your ability to be able to think about how to solve complex problems and then execute on those solutions, that's going to be something that I think is of more value. So, it's the worst advice, because I think whenever you tell people you need to rest more, you need to sit and think more, a lot of people will say like, well, I can't because my boss is always breathing down my neck and I have this huge workload. Or in cybersecurity, I've got, 5,000 alerts coming at me all the time. It is very difficult, but it's something that's essential. And I think it's well worth trying to work it into your life.
I speak quite frequently when people ask me, what do I think is the biggest skill gap out there in cybersecurity? And I say it's critical thinking and being able to determine what's the enterprise risk really that's happening, and then what's the cost associated with that. You also do a lot of teaching. Is that covered in the cybersecurity courses, or are you with me where you think that is a big lacking holistically in the field right now?
Oh, I always cover that in my cybersecurity classes. There's a class that I teach at Yeshiva University where it's a cyber warfare class, but it's very debate oriented. And every week we'll have a debate about a different topic. And that topic could be anything from, is Edward Snowden a patriot or a traitor? And people are forced to take one side or the other against their will. They're selected out of a hat. And, they have to come in and really understand what that side of the argument thinks. And because there's so many parts of the Edward Snowden case that are relevant in cybersecurity today, insider threat, the geopolitics between Russia and the United States. There's so much going on there. All of the diplomatic fallout from that. And, some other ones are, we talk about Huawei, which, is the Chinese company that has been the subject of a number of different types of bans in the United States. Should they be banned or should they not? And, China's argument is that it's anti-competitive. The US government's argument is that it's, they're a tool of the Chinese Communist Party. So kind of forcing students to take each side of those, I really want them to learn how to, not just see cybersecurity concepts as this technology that's in front of your face and there's this kind of attack and there's this kind of adversary, but there's a whole body of opinion behind really everything. And, it's especially with the kind of monitoring that we're getting in place now, insider threat stuff, people being monitored as they're working from home, understanding the pros and cons of those things or why people might object to them is just essential. You can't do your job as a CISO if you don't know why somebody doesn't want to be monitored and you don't understand the laws behind it or the arguments that have been made against it.
No, I do that quite frequently myself. I think part of it's because of the courses I take also in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. But one thing, I took Equifax, I took Anthem, I took Capital One, a plethora of other ones. And what I do is I look at even the congressional hearings and stuff like that. A lot of people remember, like, they're great material because they have to be cited. And what it is I, wrote like maybe a 15-page synopsis of each one. And then what I said is I always put like a bracket on the name and then take the name out and then put your company name in there. And you're like, oh, well, the CAO and the CISO were not talking and they did not talk to this person. Then this person had to go through this person and this person was off the list. Yeah. Could that have been you? So right. So that's the one thing I don't think that people always look at, we look at a breach, but do you look at what was I'll call them the anatomy of the breach and why it got through. It's not only the bad guys getting in, but why did they get in? How did they get in? How long were they a sleeper? Who was supposed to be looking where? Who didn't make those communications? And looking at it from a holistic perspective on like, could that have been us? And if there's an area that could be us, how do we share that up? Do you see that that's missing as well too? I see that coming back a lot.
I mean, look at the the CEO of Equifax, when he testified before Congress, blamed somebody who I think was like an engineer or a security engineer. I can't remember what his title was off the cuff, but he was in one of the lines of business, one of the many lines of business. Somebody who was, I mean, I don't know how many layers he was below the CEO, but they didn't have a direct line of communication to one another. But he blamed this person, and it was like, this CEO actually doesn't understand the problem. I can't imagine how many times he's been brought, a budget proposal that was rejected. I think you see these same themes come up time and again. I think Capital One is a great example of just a really interesting breach that I think was in the realm of just not preventable. Because today, if you look at what we have as far as cloud security tools and the ability to close out every single bucket that these engineers are working in on tons of different projects, many of them are projects that are going to make the business money. So there's not like a lot of security involved up front. And it's one individual who had malicious intent, who had passwords, who had probably been trustworthy up to that point. It's something that I think everybody really has to understand, that even there are limits to communication. So I actually teach the Equifax breach in one of my classes at Georgetown as a tabletop, and it's a fictional Equifax-like scenario, but I am planning on changing it out to that Capital One breach, because I think that's where these lone wolves, some of these are going to be completely unpreventable, and that's where a lot of these attacks will come from in the future. And I think for CEOs and people who will be speaking about these at a high level, they really need to understand the psychology behind why these events take place. The technology, it eventually will trail off, and there will be some things that will never be able to be covered, especially when it comes to insider threat.
One of the ones I like to do too is I like to take the Anthem one, especially when I'm dealing with financial people, because they're like, it's just a phishing, a big deal. And they're like, well, could you stomach this much? And then I'm like, now editing on reputation, the credit reporting, what they change for the infrastructure. What I do is every slide it adds on the cost. You're like, oh my, last time I looked at it was like 650 million. But initially, if you only looked at the initial reports, I was $1 million, $2 million, whatever. So it's the ongoing residual costs. And then I always take a look too about, and did it happen again after you paid all that money? Do you do that when you teach as well too? I like to do that with my teams. It's the residual reintroducing of something that should have been handled before, right? It's the reinduction rate is the key metric, the KPI there.
Absolutely. And I think, so, one of the things that is very difficult for CISOs to quantify is, it is difficult for them to quantify how much these breaches cost. It's something they get asked all the time. It's something that there are plenty of companies that put out that put out studies about how much money is lost in cyber attacks every year, how much is lost to ransomware, but we don't really have a really great grasp of the problem. And so I'll talk a little bit about the company that we just started, which is devoted only to clawing back the money that has been lost to wire fraud, specifically business email compromise. Over the past couple of years, the FBI has developed a really effective way of clawing back those funds before it's too late. It's called the Financial Fraud Kill Chain, and you can look at it. It's a publicly available service. But a lot of places, they don't know that yet. And by places, I mean the banks who are advising their clients who have been victims, the companies that are victims themselves. They don't realize that they are susceptible to this because they think that they have phishing email controls in place, and they think that they have the right, that nobody would be fooled by something like this. Very, very sophisticated people get pulled into these BEC scams all of the time, and it's a real dollar loss. That is actually what I like about it, because it's
quantifiable.
Very clearly, if you lost $1 million to business email compromise, you lost $1 million, and that's exactly how much you lost. There's not a downtime calculation. There's not a missed productivity calculation. it's very straightforward. And because so many cyber products are focused on, the long-term subscription-based sort of risk assessments and gap assessments and program creation, this is something that sometimes falls through the cracks. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they just lose this much money and there's no recourse. And I think there are still a lot of gaps in cybersecurity as well. I think there's a lot of innovation out there, and there are a lot of things, some of the more innovative people who are coming up with technology, especially in AI, will be able to solve. So again, it was another meandering answer. I think you caught me on a too much coffee day.
It's great because it leads us back actually when we talk about ChatGPT, and we're not picking solely on that, where we're talking about the open AI type accounts, because one of the things is you used to be able to flag, if it's an SMS message that doesn't quite sound the same. So maybe you have that belly check. If that email came in, that belly check. If that voice came in, belly check. But they've gotten so well now that the people who normally you could flag a little bit that way, now they literally can go ahead and they can use a lot of these tools and say, hey, I need you to write it more similar to how Rebecca writes, or I need you to sound more like that company writes. Are you seeing that as being a strong fear right now that's also going on with the clients that you're speaking with on how and I think that gap is bridged so quickly?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that it's not just text, obviously. There's, we have seen some voice, we've seen fake. Some even video calls that are fake. And prior to this, if one of the controls to prevent a business email compromise is to just do a phone check, to call somebody, voice verify. Now, that might not be an option. And people have been taught to do that for years. So it's like, we will have to unwind a lot of habits. But in the meantime, many of these companies will still be susceptible to this. And the AI stuff is very interesting. I think one of the things that I have always worried about with it is that, recently I plugged in some parameters of a story that I was sort of interested in. And I wanted to see what it would come up with. Could it write me a news article about the story that there had not been a news article written about? And it did produce a very beautifully written article, and it was about a court case. So it was about something real, but all of the names in it were fictional. They were just made up. And so I know that they call that hallucination, and that's been something that they talked about on 60 Minutes. Not my hallucination, the AI's. So, I think that's very interesting. But if it's going to be a technology that's used for introducing code into any environment, or it's going to introduce, financials, it can be tampered with. I'll go back to journalism a little bit. Most of the big newspapers have gotten rid of copywriters and copy editors. Now it's just reporters and top level editors, and that's it. And a lot of reporters are expected to just publish their stories after kind of proofreading them themselves, especially at some of the smaller outlets. And it's the same thing with the AI stuff. It seems that it will be produced and there won't be anybody going back over this to check it out. I think the technologist view would be, well, that's unnecessary. That's just another waste of time. That's what AI is supposed to get rid of. But it really worries me that the fact checking might not quite be there. I imagine it, the what if scenario that we were worried about at Chase like 10 years ago was, what if a hacker got in and changed something on the balance sheet? Well, what if, AI has introduced this process and either it's incorrect or a hacker gets in and changes something, but then it spins into something even bigger. That's where you could have a major financial impact. And it's a very worrisome thing. I'm not as worried about the job loss, which I think is inevitable as technology progresses, as I am about some of the cyber warfare capabilities around that stuff.
I just want to remind our audience that business continuity under the business cyber liability insurances, there's AI riders coming on in renewal. So make sure you take a look at that and intellectual property and how that may be negatively affected and not being able to cover With that, we're running out of time. So what is the best way for people to get a hold of you personally, to be a keynote speaker or to go ahead and to engage the services of your company?
Yeah, you can email me at Kate. The company is called Blueline Recoveries. I'm sorry, I'm really bad at the marketing piece. I think I should have said that up front or something. Blueline Recoveries is what it's called. You can email me at kate@bluelinerecoveries.com. And you can always find me on LinkedIn, is the only social media I use. Especially with what all the information Facebook collects. But yeah, I love talking to people. I love hearing about any kind of financial fraud. If there's any way that I can help, please give me a call. I love to help people out.
Hey, thank you so much. You are a soulful CXO.
Oh, thank you. That's great. I am a CXO now. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. You're great. Keep it up.